What's up, guys? Seth, keeping it real. We are at that point in building this company where we are figuring out how to protect our assets. When you start a company, it's so important that you understand the structure. So first, I'll walk you through what we're doing, and then I'll explain what it means. And this is not tax advice or legal advice, just common sense. First of all, we have what is called our C-corp. Seth, why would you do a C-corp instead of an LLC? Watch, and I'll show you. Let's draw this. C corporation. Beautiful. Next, this C corp will be owned by my LLC and by Ron's LLC. So here is Seth's LLC. Here's Ron's LLC. And here's our C corp. So what's happening here is Seth's LLC and Ron's LLC own the C corporation. Now, you might be thinking, well, doesn't that seem like a little complicated? Why do you need to do that? Now, Seth's LLC will own 26% of the C Corp, and Ron's LLC will also own 26%. And you're thinking, okay, well, where's the other 48%? Well, that's called shares. We're going to give these shares out to people who we find high value team members who we want to work with. But here's the thing. Seth will have 26% voting rights. Ron will have 26% voting rights. But if there is ever a stalemate, and this was my idea, by the way, Ron gets the final say because two captains will sink a ship. And he has more experience in this specific industry we're going into. I have a lot of business experience, but not in this industry. So you need to decide who's the final decision maker and have the humility to be okay with that. However, what are we going to do with the remaining 48% of those shares? Well, we're going to divvy those out to people who we find to be very high value team members. They will not be voting shares. A voting share means they would have decisions in the company itself. They don't get voting shares. But what they would get is quarterly dividend payouts. So let's just say our good friend Bobby McGee, which by the way, he'll be back on this channel soon. Let's just say Bobby McGee owns 5%. Well, if we have $1 million in a quarter, he's going to get 5% of the profits, which is $50,000 if all million is profit. Think about that. So just by owning a little bit of the shares, there still is a nice payout in a quarter as a result. But we're only going to give this to people who we really want to be part of this team. Now, Bobby McGee will have no voting power. He doesn't make decisions for the company. That's reserved for Seth and Ron alone. Ron is the final decision maker. Now, the question, of course, comes up, well, Seth, why don't you just open a C Corp? Why have it owned by two LLCs? Here's why. This C Corp will have employees. Seth will be one. Ron will be one. With a C Corp, you call it officers. And a C Corp will be paying Seth a salary, and the C Corp will be paying Ron a salary. So there's going to be money going towards Seth and going towards Ron. But instead of that money going to me personally, because what if I was sued? Or what if I went into debt? All of a sudden now, that money that went to me could be taken from me. Instead, it goes to my LLC. So it's safe. That way, if the LLC got into trouble, the LLC takes the hit. I don't. And the LLC will then pay some to me, but it can keep whatever I decide I want it to keep. By having two layers, not only does it make you more protected, but it also keeps you from becoming a target. Because if someone says, oh, I want to know what the name of your C Corp is, you would never guess. And no one would know because it is located in Wyoming. And Wyoming creates an entire anonymity. In fact, between Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware, the three top states for having LLCs or C corporations, Wyoming's the best because there is no state tax. The administration fees are very low, and you can quickly open or close a corporation or LLC in that state. It is literally set up to help entrepreneurs succeed. So this is our structure, but there's one thing I just want to elaborate on for a second. When you own an LLC or a C corporation, everything the business creates goes into that entity. This is one of the hardest things for new business owners to get their head around. Let's just say you start a coffee shop. You kind of think of the coffee shop as your thing, right? The inventory as your thing, the contacts for marketing as your thing, but you have to start treating it as its own separate entity apart from you. Because when the day comes where it goes into debt or if it gets sued, there's no separation between you and the company. That means you are what's called a sole proprietor. In fact, if you were just to go right now and start selling lemonade on the street, you're a sole proprietor. And if you got sued, those plaintiffs can take your lemonade and they can take your personal bank account and they can take your car. If you have investments in crypto, if you have a personal savings account, if you have stocks, they can take any of that because there's no separation between you and your company. A sole proprietor means I am the company is me, we're one and the same. And it's the dumbest way to run a business, the dumbest way possible. So it's really important that you either open an LLC or a C Corp. Now, Seth, why would I choose one over the other? Well, let me first state, if this is your LLC right here, you need to understand as you probably know, it stands for Limited Liability Company, which means the liabilities that you have are limited. Why? Because your entity, the LLC, is helping to limit it. In other words, if someone came after you and tried to take your stuff legally, or you owed a bunch of money and you had to pay it back and anything like that, you want the LLC to be separate from you so they can take what's in the LLC, but they can't take your stuff because the LLC is the one who's accountable, not you. Now, to some people, it's like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You're running the LLC. Welcome to business. This is how business works. Now, what about a C corporation? Well, let's put that over here. The only reason Ron and I are opening a C corporation is because we are going to be divvying out shares. In other words, as I said before, we're only going to own 52%. Our LLCs own 52%, which means we have leverage to attract really high value, high worth people to help us build this company because there's a nice benefit for them. C corporations make that very easy. LLCs make that extremely difficult. A C corporation has just as much limited liability as an LLC. There's no difference when it comes to liability. They're 100% safe when it comes to separating your personal assets from your company's assets. Now, someone's going to say, well, Seth, what about an S corporation? Can I open an S corporation? No. Well, can I start an S corporation? No. What are you talking about? An S corporation is not a kind of company. It's not even an entity. There's no such thing as opening an S-Corp. All it is a way of being taxed. That's it. Like, let's just say you said, Seth, I'm going to start an S-Corp. Sure, you could do that, but here's how you have to do it. Open an LLC or a C-Corp, then get a form and fill it out and file it with the IRS and request permission to be taxed as an S-Corp. That's all it is. It is a tax status. Now, why would someone want to be taxed as an S-Corp? Well, let me explain. For the sole proprietorship, I'm going to do a triangle just for fun. Let's say that's your sole proprietorship. We'll just call it SP. So you have an LLC, a C-Corp, sole proprietorship. If you just start a company, just start doing business, selling lemonade, you're automatically sole proprietor. All of your personal assets are exposed. If you start an LLC or C-Corp, they're not, because anything that company produces or that you contribute to the company belongs to the company. It protects you. However, if you want to save money on taxes, there's a time and place to file as an S-Corp. In fact, let me do this just for fun. I'm going to bring this over here. You are taxed exactly the same way as if you have an LLC. A lot of people think if they open an LLC, they're going to save on taxes. You don't save on taxes at all. Not at all. It's called pass-through tax. The company makes $100,000, it goes to you. In fact, here's the crazy part. Let's just say the company makes, your LLC or your sole proprietorship makes $100,000 and you pay yourself $50,000 of it and the rest stays in the company. You don't touch it because you want to use it to buy more inventory. Well, guess what? You still have to pay taxes on that $50,000. But I didn't pay myself it. Doesn't matter. You still have to pay taxes on that $50,000. That is why you do not get any tax advantage being an LLC. Now, when you're just starting out, if you just made $50,000 in a year, well, it's probably what you're going to pay yourself anyways. There's no reason to try to save on taxes. You're going to have to pay those taxes. But here's the cool thing. Once you file status as an S-Corp, it can save you tens of millions in taxes when you're making a lot of money. And I'll explain how. When you are taxed, there are primarily two kinds of taxation. There's what's called personal income tax, we'll call it PI, and then there's what is called FICA. This is also known as self-employment tax. If you really want to know what it is, it's tax for Social Security and Medicare. It totals to 15.3% of your income to a certain level. 15.3%. So for example, if you make $100, $15.30 of that $100 is going to be going to pay for Social Security and Medicare, also known as FICA, also known as self-employment income. That's on top of your income tax right here. And what is income tax? Well, once you get to a certain tax bracket, like you make a certain amount, you're taxed up 37%. When you add this 37% plus this 15.3%, you're looking at over 50% taxation. In other words, you make $1 million, $500,000 goes back to the government. Sound like theft? 100% agree, but we're not going to get into that right now. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'll show you how to do this legally, but yeah, it's ridiculous if you think about it. Like the more money I make, the harder I work, the more I get punished. How does that make sense? Well, consider the fact that the vast majority of taxes are paid by the richest people in the world. Like that's just a fact. I know it's really trendy to say, oh yeah, you're rich and you don't pay taxes. No, rich people just do it smart and they reduce their taxes legally applying the IRS code, but they still end up paying the vast majority of taxes that help people who genuinely need help from the government. You have these two kinds of taxation. You have personal income tax and FICA tax. Now, if you're a sole proprietorship, Or if you're an LLC, you're going to pay all of that. But if you're an S-Corp, something really cool happens. Let's say your LLC, we'll do a little square around it, is taxed as an S-Corp and you pay yourself $80,000. And it has to be a reasonable salary. I'm literally quoting the IRS when I say that. It has to be a reasonable salary. You also pay yourself another $20,000 that same year. So you made $100,000. Good job. Way to go. The $80,000, if it's salary based on where you live and the kind of industry, it needs to be reasonable. You pay the $80,000. Yes, you're going to pay your personal income tax. Yes, you're going to pay your FICA tax. So you might have like $47,000 left over. Okay, fine. But for the $20,000, you know what happens? Because it's considered a distribution and not salary, you only pay income tax. You don't pay FICA tax. You literally just saved yourself being taxed. You just saved yourself $3,000. Like, go take your wife on a vacation. Literally, you just saved yourself $3,000. Now, if you were to take your distribution is $200,000 because you're doing really well. Okay, now we're talking about $30,000. That could be part of a down payment to a house or a real estate property investment. You see where I'm going with this? So being taxed as an S-Corp gives you a huge advantage. And you can be an LLC or a C-Corp and be taxed as an S-Corp. Now, you might be thinking, well, Seth, what about this whole S-Corp thing? Why aren't we filing to be taxed as an S-Corp? Well, there's a couple things going on here. Number one, let's just say you are paid by your C-Corp. We'll use the same example, $80,000. And I'm going to try to write more nicely this time. Look at that. Isn't that fancy? So that's your salary, which means you're going to pay your income tax up to 37%, and you're going to pay your FICA tax 15.3%. It's a lot of money, I know. Let's say left over, you have $20,000. Now, this $20,000, you're not going to pay it to yourself. You're going to keep it in the company. If you do that, instead of being charged income tax on that money, like you would for an LLC and like you would for an S-Corp, you're only charged 21%. And just for funsies, what is 0.21 times 20,000? You're charged only $4,200 off of the 21%. And that $4,200 is called corporate tax. And therefore, this $20,000 is going to stay inside your corporation. And let's just say 2 years later, you decide to pay it out to yourself. That's where they call it double taxation. See, you paid it out to yourself and you already pay corporate tax. And now you're also paying income tax and FICA tax. Well, if it's paid out as a dividend, you do not owe FICA tax. And here's the cool thing. When you pay yourself a salary of, let's say, $80,000, that actually is a business expense of the C-Corp. So it reduces the C-Corp's taxability for corporate tax. Does that make sense? In other words, you can consider a write-off. So in this situation, if you pay Bobby McGee and Lucy Pickleberry each $100,000, so that's $200,000 in salary, they work for your C-Corp, that salary amount, that $200,000 reduces your taxable income for corporate tax. So if you have left over in your company, let's just say $500,000 won't be taxed to corporate tax rate, only $300,000 because of the $100,000 that were paid out are tax deductible. When people say it's double taxation, that's only somewhat true. By paying a salary, you're actually reducing how much you have to pay in corporate tax. The other cool thing is if you let it sit in the company, the $20,000 as this example, because you want to reinvest it, well, I'd much rather only pay 21% on that than pay up to 50% on that if I was an S-Corp or an LLC. Because if you keep that $20,000 inside your S-Corp or inside your LLC, even though you didn't take it out, you still owe taxes before April 15th of the next year, no matter what, which leaves you less left over to reinvest in the company. So my point is this, if you're going to have shares and distribute shares, and if you're trying to reinvest in your company and grow it big, there comes a point where having a C-Corp makes it a lot more manageable and easy. To summarize this up, make sure no matter what you do, I'm just going to start fresh here. If this is your business, okay, and you have all this stuff in your business, your company car, your business bank account, your inventory, all of that, make sure you put it inside. Here we go. You ready? An LLC. This is so important. And if not an LLC, then a C-Corp. But by putting an LLC, you create a separation between you and it. And just one more thought. This is so cool. And I love this about business. When you understand that your company is a separate entity from you, it allows you to treat it as if it was another person. There's a lot of business owners who treat their LLC horribly. They're abusive. They take money from it when they shouldn't. They starve it. They don't treat it well. They don't hire good employees. They just kind of use it for whatever their impulse is. And that's a horrible way to run a company. You want to treat it as a separate entity from you. Take care of it, especially in the early days. Treat it like a newborn child. Because what do newborn babies need? They need mama's milk. It needs people. It needs time. It needs knowledge. And it needs money. Your four core assets. And whichever one you have the least of, you're going to use up the other ones until you have more of this one. So for example, if you don't have a lot of money, but you have a lot of time, then don't go hire someone to do something, do it yourself. But once you have less time and more money, that's when you would hire someone instead of taking more time away from your day. That's just managing assets. All right, our goal is to get to 100,000 by the end of the year. This is our company's setup structure. I'll see you in the next video, and thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and you found it helpful, but don't thumbs up based on my art because that would not be good. See ya.